From Washington, this is VOA News. A U.S. official says Russian missile shipments to Syria are bad timing. The Nigerian military launches airstrikes. I'm Vincent Bruce reporting from Washington. The top U.S. military officer, General Martin Dempsey, says Russia missile shipments to Syria are ill-timed and very unfortunate. Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Friday the missiles will embolden President Bashar al-Assad and prolong the suffering in Syria. He said Mr. Assad could think the missiles somehow will make him safer and more prone to a miscalculation. The New York Times says the Russian anti-ship cruise missiles are more advanced than previous shipments. Russia has said it is fulfilling its contractual obligations to Syria and has no interest in seeing President Assad remain in power. For more details on this story, visit us at voanews.com. The Nigerian military has begun operations against the Islamist militant group Boko Haram using fighter jets and helicopter gunships. A military spokesman said Friday Nigerian forces launched airstrikes against suspected Islamist militant camps in the country's northeast. President Goodluck Jonathan declared a state of emergency in Borno and the neighboring states of Yobe and Adamawa earlier this week following a sharp rise in attacks by the militant group Boko Haram. Thousands of people have died in those attacks and associated sectarian violence in recent years. However, as VOA's Henry Ridgewell reports, there are some doubts over the effectiveness of an all-out military response.
Nigerian troops are already part of the international force currently fighting Islamist insurgents in Mali. Past experience suggests it will be difficult to eradicate the Boko Haram insurgency on Nigerian territory, says Elizabeth Connolly, assistant head of the Africa programme at London-based Policy Institute Chatham House.
It is not a change in strategy. It is an intensification of strategy. And there's been a lot of complaints about the significant use of force in the past and that it hasn't actually achieved anything. In fact, you've seen a strengthening of Boko Haram.
The state of emergency in the northeast lasts for 6 months. Analysts say the military operation could take much longer. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
A series of bomb attacks has targeted Sunnis in Iraq, killing 70 people and increasing fears of renewed sectarian conflict. The deadliest blast Friday struck Sunni worshippers who were leaving a mosque in Baquba, just north of Baghdad, and was followed by a second explosion as people gathered to help the wounded. At least 41 people were killed in the twin bombings. Burmese President Thein Sein will join a town hall meeting at the Voice of America this Sunday as he begins the first U.S. visit by a Burmese head of state in nearly 50 years. VOA's Burmese service will broadcast the session on Sunday evening, Washington time, to Burma. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the United States wants to see Bangladesh move forward on improving labor standards after a building collapse that killed hundreds of garment workers. Kerry met Friday with Foreign Minister Deepu Moni and expressed deep sadness of the Rana Plaza disaster that left more than 1,100 people dead 3 weeks ago. Zimbabwean Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai is declaring President Robert Mugabe's party dead. Sebastian Mofu attended a Movement for Democratic Change Party national conference and filed this report for VOA.
The event Friday was not a musical program, but part of a 3-day national police conference in Harare. Zimbabwe is preparing for polls to end the country's fragile coalition government. Recent voter surveys point to Mr. Tsvangirai's popularity waning. On Friday, he said President Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF party is now dead.
It is a formality of saying those who believe in past policies that have destroyed this country have no chance, have no place for the future of this country.
Millions of Zimbabweans are said to have fled to neighboring Botswana and South Africa, seeking better opportunities as their country's economy has dwindled. Sebastian Mofu for VOA News in Harare.
The U.S. State Department has denied Iranian media reports that the United States deported the Iranian wrestling team ahead of a Sunday meet in Los Angeles. A State Department official tells VOA's Persian News Network that U.S. authorities had nothing to do with their departure. And a new study finds that marijuana has a positive effect on blood sugar levels. That's according to a new study in the American Journal of Medicine, suggesting it could be helping diabetes control. I'm Vincent Bruce, VOA News.